it's like either we're Christian or we're Muslim. No, it's not that simple. You know, study the Quran as I've done, study the Gospels with a fine-tooth comb as I've done, study the Gnostic Gospels that have only come out recently, study the Mary Magdalene Gospel, the Gospel of Thomas. You realise that Muhammad was essentially a Gnostic Christian in a desert lineage of oral transmission that had gone back to the earliest roots of the Christ revelation. And he was picking up on elements of Christian gnosis and Jewish Gnostic traditions and so on. And that was a mélange that became Islam. Therefore, we don't need to be fighting between Islam and Christianity. We should be doing scholarship and studying the common gnosis, which is universal to all mankind, which is ultimately the enlightenments that I talked about at the beginning of this talk. There's enlightenments available in all different schools within both Islam and Christianity. And, you know, it's a matter of temperament, ultimately. It doesn't matter. It's like going to a great Persian restaurant. There's a wonderful Persian restaurant in West London, which I know and love well. And you go in and there's all these dishes. They're different colours. There's rice with different colours in, and there's different, you know, vegetables and salads, and they're all out. It's like 100 different dishes. And you can sort of choose. You can help yourself to which kind you fancy. Well, that's kind of like enlightenment. It's like an extraordinary smorgasbord of approaches, nuanced approaches to different enlightenment potentials. I've tried to put this into my pyramid table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, which I first developed in that school, where the boys all walked out from the ethics class. By the way, I should just point out with certain irony that some of those students then went on and read philosophy at university and did PhDs and so on, and fell in love actually with the subject. So, you know, it's one sometimes one meanders around to come back to the pursuit of truth. I'm meandering a bit here. I want to come back to this question of preemptive conflict resolution, because if you have a transpersonal historical approach to conflict, you can see the karmic laws that are being ignored and suppressed. So in the Palestinian-Israel conflict, let's take one of the most difficult on the planet, there's huge complex karma, and I've written about this. You have karmic inheritances right from the time of the biblical era between the early Philistine community, because Palestine comes down from the word Philistine, who were indigenous peoples living on the coastal regions, who didn't follow Yahweh, didn't follow the God of the Jewish tribes, who were inland, who were just beginning to congregate around, well, they captured the citadel, which they then called Jerusalem. It wasn't called that before. And under their King David, they began a kind of, state. And they fought with and defeated and the Philistines and beat them to a sort of it wasn't exactly they didn't win, but there was a status, there was a kind of now it's interesting that archaeologists are discovering things from that period. They're going through different archaeological sites in Israel and finding temples of the Philistines to their gods, like Dagon, the fish god. And they were interesting, complex sea peoples, and it now looks as if they were related to the Mycenaean Greeks. So these Philistines, Palestines, were actually partly Mycenaean Greeks who'd settled on the coast, hence their love of the sea, the fish god, and so on. And they were following general universal pagan traditions. They had their goddesses, their gods, their temples, and that's what everybody had, from Greece all the way through to Stonehenge. It seemed to them that these crazy hill tribes who were just insisting on worshipping their one Yahweh had gone slightly bonkers and were a bit in your face with it, So that's the beginning of this karmic conversation. It's been going on for 3,000 years. And I can see it from both sides. As a Druid, also as an esoteric Christian and a Sufi and a Kabbalist, I've studied the Gnostic lineages of all the traditions on the planet. And that's led me to hold this this perspective of universal enlightenment potential. So I would say you can be an enlightened, Philistine or an enlightened Israeli, but you could also be an evil one of both. And there no doubt were at the time. What I don't think is valid is to say that this lineage alone is the only path. And that's the trouble with monotheism. Monotheism is a very oversimplified way of a political, centralized state taking over the conversation and dominating it and saying, only this narrative, only this linear narrative is true. Now that's what states like to do, and you can watch it. Our job as intellectuals is to critique and study and clock that, right? That's what Stalin did when he took over the central state of the Bolshevik regime. He infiltrated, he took it over. And then he started slaughtering everybody that had a different narrative. Trotskyites became a bad word, and him and his henchmen, Yezhov and Yagoda, in the Reign of Terror, they slaughtered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. They made lists, like this guy, this guy, this guy, 20,000 names on a list. Stalin would tick them all, And these people were shot en masse all over the Soviet Union. Why? Because they had the wrong narrative. Most of them were communists, most of them were Bolsheviks even. Many of them had helped Lenin in the early revolutionary period, but they had the wrong narrative. Maybe they had a cousin who had a girlfriend who was a friend of Trotsky, who was in Mexico and had an independent streak outside of Stalin's deemed narrative. And so on that basis, they were added to the list of people to be shot. Now this is a pathological extreme example, which is revealed in Simon Sebag Montefiore's great biography of Stalin, by the way, which I'm reading at the moment. That's why it's sort of fresh in my mind. The horror of this is that's a centralizing narrative. The Hitler narrative was the same. Nazi Germany was run with this monotheistic narrative. We, the Nazi Party are the truth, the light, the way, and we take over and destroy our enemies. Many of whom happen to be intellectuals or communists or socialists or Jews or whatever, or they're spies working for the English. So the trouble, I think what we have to do, you see, I'm a proponent of what I call universal Zionism. I think the problem with Zionism, the way it's developed into now, and this is part of the karmic problem of the conversation between Israel and Palestine, is the kind of Zionism that's on offer is an exclusive one. It's only for us, only certain types of us. It's me, Netanyahu, and my type of people, who are either Orthodox Jews or, follow a certain kind of lineage of intellectual interpretation of what it means to be Jewish. Like, what would you do with a pagan Jewess? Say, I happen to know many amazing Jewesses who are pagans, who love the goddess traditions of the Kabbalah and ancient Israel, and who advocate peace and a reconciliation of male and female. What does orthodox normative Zionistic Judaism do with that kind of pluralistic narrative? Well, it ignores it for the large part. I want to do more than that. I want to celebrate the plurality of narratives. To me, peace is about rediscovering the complexity at the heart of human existence. We're all partly Palestinian. We're all partly Israeli. We're all partly, Buddhistic. The founder of Israel, one of them, became a Buddhist. Not many people realize that. Ben Gurion, of all the philosophers he was interested in most, was Buddhism. I think because he realized how sophisticated its logic was. And he realized that enlightenment has to be the core, ultimate goal of a people if it's going to flourish. I would say, if you go back to David, if you actually read the Bible carefully, as I've done, you find that David is constantly struggling between, should I be a normal warrior king and go out and kill the enemy? Or should I be a spiritual aspirant searching for enlightenment? Well, I would say that's the latter is the choice. And that's the prophetic lineage that is constantly critiquing the warrior king's You know, any old fool can be a warrior king, and that means like an information warrior, a drone artist, inventor of new complex weapons, Steve Bannon, wargaming the entire planet, creating a war with China. You know, these guys are psychopathic warlords, and the true intellectuals, the peace intellectuals of the planet, have to rein them in and teach them their ethics, bring them back to class, and teach them ethics basic. You know. So preemptive conflict resolution means being sensitive to conflicts before they arise and then preventing them. Like right now, I would say there's a danger of conflict between America, USA and China. Even in lockdown, they can't agree who's responsible for this COVID thing. They each blame each other. America is like a wounded bear. Doesn't know what's hitting it. It's getting millions of cases. Listen to Michael Moore's The Rumble podcast when he's interviewing medical doctors and people, and you know, poor old USA is going down. Now, a wounded bear is very dangerous. That's when it lashes out. So Bannon, who's about to ride to the rescue of Trump and his administration, they may well launch a preemptive war on China, a nuclear war, because they can, and it gives them a sense of power, and it would take the heat off the conversation that actually America should look at its own backyard and clear up its own racism and so on. Yeah, so we in the conflict resolution and peace community have to be aware of these possibilities, and using legal methods like rule them out of order. Like, we have to see off, it's a bit like playing chess with the devil. We have to realise the next 4 moves ahead, Steve Bannon and Trump are going to be doing a nuclear war on China. We have to do moves that prevent that possibility. And I'm not saying that China's Communist Party is the bee's knees. I'm not saying that I'm saying that, I mean, there are people in the Chinese Communist Party that historically since the 1950s, Mao wanted the nuclear bomb for China from Stalin. He got it. He bullied Stalin into giving it to him, and all the technical expertise that made it possible. He then conquered Tibet in order to have the uranium, because China's uranium is all in Tibet. Forget about the rights of the Tibetan people. They're just like Buddhist primitive types in his mind. And he's been swanning it over Tibet ever since, and building up China into a sort of nuclear power. Now, he would often say in the 50s and 60s, he was prepared for a nuclear war with America. Stalin warned him, and then Khrushchev warned him and said, look, you know, these nuclear weapon things we've given you, they are pretty dangerous. You can only have them on condition you never use them. Mao was constantly saying, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Of course I'm going to use them eventually. I'll use them when I feel like it. And he was constantly threatening to bomb Taiwan. The guy was a psychopath on the level of Hitler and Stalin. Mao is the secretive psychopath that very few people realise how evil he actually was. Only come out recently, you know, read a book called Mao the Unknown Story by the woman that wrote Wild Swans. I can't remember her name now, but brilliant woman, and it's a huge book going into the details of Mao's psychopathic criminality. So I'm not saying, you know, Mao is a saint. No, I'm saying we have 2 damaged, flawed powers, you know, whatever, demonic powers, I would say, who might be tempted into, ego battles that are going to destroy humanity. And I'm a little European Brit Canadian stuck in France. I don't want to go down. I don't want France and Europe and all that I love to be caught up in the hell on earth of a nuclear war. I mean, it's beyond what I would accept as a philosopher for peace. And therefore we have to do all we can intellectually. My only, fight back is launching the project for planetary enlightenment, planetary awakening. That's what we have to do, folks. And we have time. We can do it. I think this coronavirus is very interesting because my reading is, again, karma and history. It's come out of a dysfunctional conversation between the superpowers, between America and China, who've been vying for coronavirus gain of function capability. They bullied the French into giving them, the Chinese, a super lab with, the ability to make this stuff. And the French gave them some know-how, and then eventually they realised it was folly and they clawed back, but the Americans came and took over. So China's stolen the capacity to make coronavirus bioweapons from the West, and the West, individuals from the West, thought this is good for my kudos, I'll go and teach them how to do this, like that Harvard professor and so on. Part of the fight back by intellectuals around the planet is we have to get tabs on what these dark scientists are up to. We have to know the names, like Scylla Elworthy did with nuclear scientists back in the 90s. We need a new project with the Oxford Research Group and other peace research bodies who are doing all this bioweapons research, who are doing, dual purpose research, it's called. It could be used for medicine and health, or it could be used for bioweapons research. Yeah, I want a list of names, I want to know them all, and I want we, the citizens of the planet, the peace people that are the millions and millions of the majority, to delegitimize that kind of research. No university in the world, in my opinion, should spend more for research on military investigation, scientific investigation that is dual use, could be used for military purposes, than it spends on the humanities and arts and peace studies. I want every university in the world to have a department of peace studies. I've spoken at the UN to that effect. There's a committee that used to meet in UN headquarters calling for this, with experts from every country around the world developing peace studies in universities. I was the British delegate, and I still maintain this is a moral duty. Of course, if you say to me, yeah, but that's just ethics talk, we're walking out at this point because there's no such thing as ethics, well, fine. I'll talk to the few that remain in the room, because, my dear friends, there is such a thing as ethics. And if we neglect it at our peril, if the people that are denying ethics win, if they succeed on this planet, the planet is doomed. We are going down. Coronavirus is just the first bit of World War III. Now, I'm not prepared to go down without a fight. And so a peace studies faculty department in every university, funded as much as the military research going on in that university. The whole thing is about priority of funding. I've also called for every Ministry of Defence on the planet to develop the government of each country to develop a parallel Department of Peace with as much funding as their Ministry of Defence. So in Britain, the MOD, we all know the big building in Whitehall Court, as big a building, as well funded for peace. I don't care where it is, it could be in a different part of Britain, stick it in somewhere, somewhere nice, right? Aberystwyth, Department of Peace, because, Aberystwyth has got some clever intellectual types who care about peace. The Welsh tradition, as I know well from living in Wales for 10 years, where I got seriously interested in Druidry, there's a living lineage of Welsh peace thinkers. Many of them were poets, many of them are bards, Iolo Morgannwg and all the others. The Rattle Skull Genius, as he was called by Greg Jenkins, who teaches at the University of Aberystwyth, where they have a brilliant Centre for Advanced Celtic Studies, doing a lot of Druid stuff. So that would be a good venue, I think, for the Ministry of Peace for the UK, insofar as the UK is going to survive. I hope it does, but I can predict one thing: it will only survive if it comes out as a peace-loving nation and gets rid of its nuclear weapons fleet and totally redoes the contract constitutionally between Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England. I've proposed how to do that in a constitutional remap that I've done, and I put it on a website. And that means giving more power to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, decentralising things, and having a government for the UK as a whole, which is drawn from a new Senate, which would replace the House of Lords, which would be people by people from each of the regions. That would be the government of the UK. The so-called House of Commons would become simply the House of Governance for England, which is effectively what it is. but it would no longer have the right to rule Scotland, Wales, etc. That would be the UK government based in the Senate, which would be the House of Lords. And you can read about this in my proposed constitutional reform. And I think the progressive parties in Britain, the SNP, the Plaid Cymru, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, that's the progressive bloc in British politics, and the Rainbow Alliance and so on in Northern Ireland. And the SLD and so on, whatever they're called, Social and Democrat Party in Northern Ireland, they should all endorse this proposal to transfer power from the English-dominated House of Commons to a new Senate for the genuine United Kingdom. This is a major constitutional reform I'm proposing, coming after years and years and years of study and reflection. And I organised and co-chaired with Lord Ennals and others about 33 meetings in the House of Lords, and I've met intellectuals from all walks of the political framework, and spent time living in Wales and Scotland. I set up a mediation service for multi-faith, multicultural mediation, and so that's my proposal. We'll see. Again, this is preemptive conflict resolution. This is trying to prevent the UK breaking up. The only other solution, my friends, is Scotland goes completely independent within about 2 or 3 years. That will happen. It's the only other solution. I personally would rather we use this as an epoch and a time to rethink the relationship of the part to the centre and the margin to the centre. Okay, so I want to talk about something else here, complex issue, which is, why is it that sometimes in life there's a process at work which I call negative dialectics. So somebody wants something A, and they put out for it and they go for it. But reality gives them B, the complete opposite. And that seems to happen also at the micro level of human relationships, and at the national level, and at the international level. There's a sort of weird transference of energies that happens. Is this karmic? Let's just take an example. We've got the Mary Magdalene Day coming up, July 22nd. We've got a feast day to celebrate. We've got some great speakers going to be on a Zoom conference on Mary Magdalene. And it's a very moving time. Mary Magdalene wasn't a bad woman. I mean, she was a devotee, I think an intellectually intelligent woman who was a friend and devotee and follower of Christ, who was a great rabbi. What were they teaching? They were teaching universal love and enlightenment, exactly what I'm talking about. Christ wasn't going around saying, let's have a violent revolution, let's organise, mass assassinations of Roman officials and things. On the contrary, he was prepared to talk to Romans, heal their daughters. He was prepared to talk to Jewish rabbis and heal them. I mean, he was a universalist who'd got to that place of enlightenment outside of the confines of the binary system of thought that tries to hem us all into a sort of either-or context. Okay, so that's what he was teaching and putting out. And in return, what he got was a backlash of absolute fanatical the military capitalist elites came for him to arrest him at dead of night, and within a few days they crucified him, the most horrible death that the Roman state used for anyone that poked out against them. And military industrial capitalist systems still do the equivalent to this day and have done. I don't care if they call themselves Marxist, but under Stalin it's the same system. It's the juggernaut of military plus power plus finance working away. So the ordinary Russian peasant didn't have a hope. You got killed if you dared to say something about Stalin's mustache looked like it should be shaved off or something. It got to that level of pettiness, right? So anyway, the oppositional dialectics kick in. Poor old Jesus is arrested. The flock scatter. Mary Magdalene, goes to the tomb to find the body. And there's a very moving passage in the account by St. John, which I was reading out this morning in prayers, when she's looking for the tomb. She can't find the body. It's gone. And there's this moment, I'm only going to read out a tiny bit here, when she says, "They've taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they have laid him." They've taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they've laid him. Now, I would say we're in that state of unknowing still. They've taken away my Lord of truth. They, the military establishment, police, the guy that killed George Floyd, the people that make and run our nuclear weapon systems. They have taken away the body of my Lord of truth. And I don't know where they put him. We're still in that Mary Magdalene moment of not knowing. And that's a state of angst that we find ourselves in as a planet. And what I'm saying is that if we cultivate and develop our enlightenment potential, both individually, in small groups, in our families, in our churches, in our synagogues, in our mosques, if we study our Qurans, as I've done on this commentary on the Quran, if we study our Gospels, I've done a commentary on the Gospels, if we study our Bhagavad Gitas, our Vedas, our Upanishads, our Torah, from the highest level of Gnostic enlightened interpretation we can cultivate a common hermeneutic of enlightened reflection, which is actually there in all those lineages and traditions. If you study deeply, as I've done, into the comparative hermeneutic of sacred scripture, you'll find that level of enlightened analysis is what all those traditions say that you have to reach in the end. Even in, say, the old monastic schools of Europe, in the Christian tradition, there were reckoned to be these different levels of analysis. You can look at a scripture from its literal meaning, you can look at it from its allegorical, its moral meaning, or you could look at it from its mystical meaning. And there were 6 levels. The highest level is the mystical, where it becomes a tool for your own enlightenment. It sparks off your own enlightenment process. That's what all the scriptures do and can do and should do. Right, I want to mention also we've had a lovely celebration today for Cadmus Militis, who was Cadmus was sent by his father, Agenor, to find Europa, the sister. And he didn't find her, but he founded Thebes, and he brought the alphabet to Greece, which is the ancestor of all the European alphabets. Apart from the runes, even the runes, but they may have had some lineage of Paleolithic cave painting marks as well. But the Cadmus of Thebes brought the alphabet, and to me that's a symbol of literature. So I'm a great lover of poetry, it's why I write poetry. I've just published my novel this last week, since we last spoke, which is an apocalyptic novel about the end of the world and how we survive it. So I do strongly recommend that. It's not really a novel, it's a diary. And you'll find it on my website. I'm not going to go into enormous detail on that. So what we need to recognise is that literature is always in search of the goddess Europa, or the equivalent in other cultures. And the purpose of poetry and writing and literature is to reunite that goddess element with ourselves, because the goddess is enlightened. Athena is the goddess who brings enlightenment, and she has many names, many forms. In the Bible she's called Sophia, Chochmah, the divine intelligence that dances with God. She's Yahweh's consort. And wisdom, Sophia, is always that. It occurs in every literature. In the biblical tradition, Jesus was regarded as her servant. or even embodiment. And I think Mary Magdalene as consort of Christ is that Sophia figure. But she dwells in every man and every woman. And that's the point of philosophia, is to love that wisdom element, which is what unites us all at that highest level of sacred hermeneutics. All the scriptures are there for us to find that commonality. I want to talk briefly about what's called intersectionality of identities. And this is a theory to do with multiculturalism and race and oppression and gender, associated with a particular woman scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw from Columbia University, a university I know and love well. And she pointed out rightly that, oppression is a complex business. It's to do with your race, your class, your educational background, your wealth, your status in society. Today is the anniversary of the Seneca Falls 1848 gathering of women who first put on the agenda of America, but also world history, the idea of women's equality, women's right to vote, and all these kind of things that were just not taken seriously in those days. And it obviously, women's liberation's come on a long way, but not completed. There are many parts of the world where women are still legally second-class citizens. And then there's the issue of race, which still is unsolved among human nations and polities. In Israel, it's great to be Jewish, but it's really not a good thing if you're Palestinian. And vice versa. There are Arab countries where it's really not a good idea to admit that you're an Israeli or Jewish person, and so on. So we have to get a universal recognition that we're all multicultural, complex people. I mean, again, get away from this binary idea of white and black. We're all shades of brown, if you want. And in our lineage and our traditions, I think we all have that rich multicultural heritage we can look back on. I mean, I'm myself a mixture of Saxon, Norse, Viking, Norman, Celtic, Irish, Welsh, possibly Jewish, all in a mélange, and that's just the bits I know. If you take it further back, I'm also Protestant, Catholic, Druid, Sufi, etc., Kabbalistic. And I think that humanity, we should appreciate diversity and intersectionality. So I want to then launch something I call infinity theory. You see, if we're all infinite beings, let's start from the assumption that we can reach that enlightenment. This discourse is enough. You share it, they share it, it all shares around the planet, everyone listens in, and we all reach planetary enlightenment. Well, that's possible, folks, We could all, recognize our infinity, because we are all these things. And if we bring karma theory back in, then we're talking about over many lifetimes. We have incarnations in every single race and culture of the world. I know I've had incarnations in North American Indian culture. I know I've had incarnations in ancient Egyptian Hermetic culture. I know I've had incarnations in the Hebrew tradition. I know I've had incarnations in the Islamic world, in the Indian world, and so on and so on. I mean, these are just some of the ones I know, right? And in the Celtic Druidical world. I know I've had those incarnations. That means that in my soul, I am all those cultures and races. Not in my genetics of this particular body, but that's just the vehicle that I'm currently in. And it's the same for everyone listening. You've had lifetimes among all these different cultures and races and peoples, which means we are all that universality. Likewise in India and Buddhist cultures, I've had incarnations there as well. So I think we need to start a new thing. I call it infinity theory. So each of us is an infinite being. We have a trajectory in the past, all our past incarnations, going back infinitely.